It started with a storm, a real screamer that ripped through the valley like a beast unleashed. I'm talking wind that howled like a banshee and rain that hit the tin roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. Sarah Whitmore, a woman who'd known her share of hardship, was trapped inside her little cabin. It had been 14 months since her husband Thomas died. They found him face down in a stream, a bullet in his back. A murder the town was all too eager to forget. But Sarah couldn't. The man responsible, a big shot rancher named Harlan Cross, walked free. And the sheriff, well, he looked the other way. You ever wonder if justice is just for people who can afford it? Sarah was just stoking the fire, trying to chase away the ghosts, when she heard a knock. Who in their right mind would be out on a night like this? She grabbed the shotgun by the door, just in case. The man on her porch was a stranger, tall and lean with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He looked like a man who'd seen things. He was soaked to the bone and just asked for a place to wait out the storm. Nothing more. She could have turned him away. A woman alone in the wilderness? You gotta be careful. But something in his eyes, a weariness that matched her own, made her open the door. His name was Luke Garrison. As he stepped inside, she caught a glimpse of a well-worn revolver tucked into his coat. A man of the trail, and a dangerous one at that. He was clearly injured, moving with a stiffness that said his ribs hurt like hell. He didn't push, didn't try to get too close, just settled by the fire, respectful and quiet. They shared a bowl of stew, the only sound the storm's fury outside. It was a peculiar kind of peace. Two strangers, two wounded souls finding a moment of quiet in the chaos. But she couldn't shake the feeling that he was running from something, and that something was catching up fast. The storm got worse, rattling the cabin. Luke, despite his injury, was up and moving, securing the loose shutters. They worked together in the driving rain, two people fighting a common enemy. It felt easy, natural. When they came back inside, soaked and breathless, she gave him some of Thomas's clothes. It felt strange seeing a stranger in her dead husband's shirt. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. He asked about Thomas. She told him the truth, a bitter truth she rarely spoke aloud. He was murdered, she said, over water rights. Luke didn't flinch. I'm sorry, he said. This country can be cruel to good men. Then she asked him, a question that came from the depths of her own pain. Were you a good man? His bitter smile was all the answer she needed. No, ma'am, I was not. Maybe that's why I'm still breathing. He confessed to being a former lawman, a corrupt one. He'd taken money to look the other way, and a family had paid the price. A grandmother had died in a fire he'd allowed to happen. He was haunted by his past, pursued by the very people he had betrayed. The man who had entered her home was a ghost of who he once was, a man looking for a second chance. She should have been terrified. Instead, she found herself drawn to his brutal honesty, a corrupt lawman who was trying to be better, a widow who was tired of being good. They were two sides of the same coin, both of them running from a past they couldn't escape. As the night deepened, they didn't talk about their troubled past. They talked about simple things, about the land, about the future. It was a fragile, beautiful illusion, an island of warmth and light in the cold, dark world. But what happens when the storm ends? She woke up the next morning to the sound of chopping wood. Luke was out there, shirtless in the morning chill, his back muscles rippling as he split logs with practiced ease. He was already gone. He'd left her. But the pile of wood, the repaired gate, the tightened shutters, he was still here in so many ways. On the table, he'd left a note. His handwriting was surprisingly elegant. I'll ride back if there's a second chance. Just 3 words that felt like an eternity. But words were just words, weren't they? They could mean everything, and they could mean nothing at all. She headed to town to face the whispers in the stairs, the judgment of a town that had decided long ago she was tainted by tragedy. Her friend Ellen Morrison made it clear that she knew a man had stayed at Sarah's cabin. The town was already talking. The whispers were getting louder. Sarah felt the weight of them. Then Judge Juan approached her. He had been a friend of Thomas's. He told her Thomas's legal claim to the stream had been found. The papers, signed and sealed, were indisputable proof that Harlan Cross was in the wrong. He wanted to help her. It was a glimmer of hope. Maybe she could finally get justice for her husband. But as she rode home, she saw a rider approaching. Luke Garrison. He wasn't running anymore. He was coming back. But why? He told her he'd heard about the judge finding the papers. He'd come back to help her fight. Not for himself, but for her, for Thomas. He was ready to face his past, ready to use his skills to do something right for a change. He had a plan. They would ride to the county seat, present the papers to the proper authorities, and force the sheriff to act. It was a dangerous, long-shot plan, but it was their only chance. And that's when he told her the truth, the real truth. He wasn't just a lawman on the run. He was a Pinkerton detective, a man trained to hunt criminals. The scar on his face, he'd gotten it chasing the same men who now hunted him. He hadn't been running, he'd been in hiding. The past was about to collide with the present, and it was going to be a bloodbath. They rode out at dawn. The dusty trail stretched out before them, a road to either justice or to a grave. She felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. She was no longer just a widow mourning her dead husband. She was a woman fighting for what was right. Luke was by her side, a silent, steady presence. The journey was long and hard, but she felt stronger than she had in years. They reached the county seat just as the sun was setting, but they were too late. Harlan Cross had gotten there first. He was waiting for them, and he wasn't alone. He had hired gunmen, hard men with cold eyes and fast hands. The sheriff was there too, looking nervous. He was clearly in Cross's pocket. Luke knew the score. There was no running, no hiding now. This was the final showdown. He told Sarah to get behind him, that he would protect her. But Sarah had been a pawn for too long. She wasn't just a scared widow anymore. She had a shotgun and she knew how to use it. She was standing her ground, just like Thomas had. And just like he was, she was ready to die for it. Just as the guns were about to blaze, a new sound cut through the tense air. The clatter of hooves, a lot of them. A posse. But whose? Luke squinted into the fading light. He recognized the man leading them. It was his old partner, a man he had thought was dead, a man who had been hunting him all this time. The posse was looking for him. The game was up, but they weren't the only ones who had arrived. Another rider, a lone figure in a long duster, was coming up the trail, leading a pack horse. He dismounted and walked toward them, his face hidden in the shadow of his hat. He spoke with an accent that was vaguely familiar, and then he told them something that changed everything. The man was a land surveyor. He had been hired by a railroad company to map out their new expansion. And according to his map, Thomas Whitmore's land was worthless. The stream that had caused all the trouble, it dried up completely in the summer. All of Thomas's papers, the legal claims, the dispute, the murder, it was all over a bone-dry stream. It was a brilliant lie, a trick to throw them off. The real secret? Thomas's land had something far more valuable than water. The surveyor unrolled his map and a single tiny word was written on it. Silver. The man who had just revealed this truth was not a surveyor at all. He was an investor, sent by the same company that was expanding the railroad. But he wasn't alone either. The posse that had just arrived, they weren't Luke's old partners. They were hired guns, and they were here for the silver. And the investor? He was the man who had ordered the hit on Thomas, the one who had pulled the trigger, the one who had murdered her husband. The investor, his eyes gleaming with greed, held up a small object. It was a pocket watch, Thomas's watch. He'd taken it as a trophy. Luke, his face a mask of rage, lunged forward. The gunfight erupted. A hail of bullets filled the air. Luke fought with the ferocity of a caged animal, taking out one gunman after another. Sarah, a shotgun in her hands, fought alongside him. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a warrior. She wasn't just fighting for justice for Thomas. She was fighting for her life. And then, in the midst of the chaos, she saw it. Harlan Cross, the man who had always been a coward, was reaching for a gun. But before he could pull the trigger, the judge, her friend, the one who had helped her find the papers, stepped in front of him. He wasn't there to help her. He was there to silence her. He was the one who had hired the gunman. He was in on the conspiracy. And that's when the biggest twist of all was revealed. The judge wasn't a judge at all. He was a Pinkerton detective, a master of disguise, a man who had been hunting Luke for years, but he wasn't hunting him for justice. He was hunting him for revenge. Luke had put his brother in prison, and his brother had died there. The judge, fueled by a decade of rage, was here to finish him. And what was the worst part of it all? Luke Garrison wasn't a lawman at all. He was a professional thief, and the scar on his face? He got it while trying to rob the judge's brother. Everything he had told her was a lie. He had just been a distraction, a tool to find the silver. The battle raged on. The two Pinkerton detectives, the thief, the treacherous rancher, and a woman who had nothing left to lose. But the justice that was coming wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't a bullet. It was something far more devastating. The true owner of the land, the man who had the final claim to everything, stepped forward. A man everyone thought was dead. Thomas Whitmore. He wasn't murdered. He had faked his own death to escape the debts he owed to the very people who were now standing around him. He had been working with the judge, with the investor, with everyone. He was a con artist, a scoundrel. And his wife? She was just a pawn in his game. He confessed to everything. To a group of men so furious at his deception, they would have killed him on the spot. But a new voice cut through the air. The sheriff, the one everyone thought was on Harlan Cross's payroll. But he wasn't. He had been investigating Thomas for months. He knew he was a crook, a liar. He knew everything. The man everyone thought was corrupt was the only one who was honest. He hadn't helped Sarah because he couldn't, because Thomas's death had been a lie. But now, with Thomas alive and his criminal enterprise exposed, the sheriff could finally do his job. He arrested Thomas, the judge, the investor, the hired guns, everyone. So what happened to Sarah and Luke? They were two broken people who found something real in a storm of lies. They rode away from the chaos, together this time. They didn't have a plan. They didn't have a destination. They just had each other. And maybe that was enough. Maybe a second chance wasn't about finding a new place to run. Maybe it was about finding someone to stop running with. The prairie stretched out before them, and for the first time in a long time, the sun felt warm. Do you think they made it? What do you think happens to two people who find love in a field of lies? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe.